The Twits. Written by Roald Dahl, narrated by Steffi Medrano and David Aiken. The Funny Walking Stick. To pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really clever, nasty trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of bed and took her walking stick downstairs to his workshed. There, he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, onto the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. The following night, Mr. Twit stuck on another tiny bit of wood. Every night he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like a part of the old stick. Gradually, but oh so gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer. Now, when something is growing very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it happening. You yourself, for example, are actually growing taller every day that goes by, but you wouldn't think it, would you? It's happening so slowly you can't even notice it from one week to the next. It was the same with Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was all so slow and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting even when it was halfway up to her shoulder.
"That stick's too long for you,"
Mr. Twit said to her one day.
"Why, so it is,"
Mrs. Twit said, looking at the stick.
"I've had a feeling there was something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think what it was."
"There's something wrong, all right,"
Mr. Twit said, beginning to enjoy himself.
"What can have happened?"
Mrs. Twit said, staring at her old walking stick.
"It must suddenly have grown longer."
"Don't be a fool," Mr.
Twit said.
"How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of dead wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow."
"Then what on earth has happened?"
cried Mrs. Twit.
"It's not the stick, it's you,"
said Mr. Twit, grinning horribly.
"It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time now."
"That's not true,"
cried Mrs. Twit.
"You're shrinking, woman," said Mr. Twit.
"It's not possible."
"Oh, yes, it jolly well is,"
said Mr. Twit.
"You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days."
"Never!"
she cried.
"Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the shrinks. That's what you've got. You've got the dreaded shrinks."
Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly she had to sit down.